The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of curved space. Its walls shimmer with the translated thoughts of 1,000 species who had stood here before. And Ambassador Chen walked its length with steady steps that echoed in the vast silence 200 years. She thought 2 centuries of humanity standing among the stars. And now it ends not with war, but with a simple declaration. The council members occupied their designated zones around the circular floor, each species adapted to their own atmospheric and gravitational needs. Through sophisticated force fields that created invisible boundaries between worlds, the Virax matriarch hung suspended in her methane cloud. Tentacles drifting in patterns that human xenolinguists had spent decades learning to interpret, the luminarchs glowed with soft bioluminescence in their water sphere. Speaking through orchestrated pulses of light, the depth dwellers remained mostly hidden in their shadow field. Only their sensory stalks visible to those who knew where to look. Dozens more species filled the chamber, representing civilizations that had sailed between stars. When humanity still huddled in caves on Earth, Chun reached the central platform and activated her translator node. Knowing her next words would reshape human destiny, honored council members, she began, her voice carrying through translation matrices into 100 different forms of communication. I stand before you today to formally announce humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The chamber remained silent. Though Chen had expected at least some reaction, she continued, reading from the carefully prepared statement that had taken Earth's governments 6 months to negotiate and finalize. For 200 years, humanity has served the Council with dedication and honor. But we have come to recognize fundamental differences in philosophy and approach. It cannot be reconciled through continued membership. We believe the time has come for humanity to chart its own course among the stars, to develop our own identity separate from the Council's structure. This is not a declaration of hostility, Chen emphasized, watching the Virax matriarch's tentacles for any sign of agitation. We propose a 5-year transition period during which we will fulfill all existing commitments and withdraw our forces and facilities in an orderly manner. We hope to maintain friendly relations and perhaps establish bilateral agreements with individual species, but we can no longer serve as members of this body. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before the Virax matriarch finally responded, her tentacles forming the graceful patterns that the translators converted into standard galactic. We acknowledge humanity's decision with understanding and respect. Chen blinked in surprise. She had prepared for arguments, for demands to reconsider, perhaps even for veiled threats instead. The matriarch continued, every species must find its own path, and we will not stand in the way of humanity's chosen direction. The Luminarch Prime pulsed in agreement. Its light speech translated as, we have valued humanity's contributions to galactic stability and wish you well in your future endeavors one by one. The elder species of the Council offered similar statements of acceptance and even what seemed like genuine goodwill. The younger species, those who had joined the Council within the last few thousand years, appeared more agitated. The Corthan delegate clicked his mandibles nervously, and the salary representative's scales flushed with colors that indicated distress, but the elders seemed almost relieved, and that bothered Chen more than she wanted to admit. She had spent decades learning to read the subtle cues of galactic diplomacy, and something felt wrong about this easy acceptance. Meeting concluded with formal protocols and scheduling agreements for the transition period. As Chen left the chamber, she noticed the Virax matriarch exchanging what looked like significant glances with the Luminarch Prime and several other elder species representatives. Perhaps they were simply tired of dealing with humanity's aggressive stance on piracy enforcement. Chen told herself, perhaps they welcomed the reduction in Council military expenditure. Humans had, after all, served as the Council's primary enforcement arm for nearly a century, their fleets responding to threats across dozens of sectors. No other species matched human tactical innovation, or their willingness to engage in actual combat when diplomacy failed. The withdrawal process began. Immediately, human trade stations started powering down, their personnel packing decades of accumulated life into cargo containers. Military bases that had protected Council space for generations received recall orders. The Third Fleet, stationed near the Vortex Passage for 80 years, began its long journey back to human space commander Sarah Okonkwo, stood on the bridge of the HSCS Determination, and watched her crew work with characteristic efficiency. Last patrol complete. Commander, her tactical officer, reported, "All stations secure." Course plotted for New Terra, execute, Okonkwo ordered, and felt the familiar hum of the faster-than-light drive spooling up. She had been born on this ship. The daughter of 2 crew members who had met during the Korthon uprising, this was the only home she had ever known, and leaving it behind to patrol empty space near Earth felt like abandonment. But orders were orders, and humanity had made its choice: cross the galaxy. Similar scenes played out as human presence steadily withdrew from Council space. The younger species watched with growing anxiety. Humanity had been the shield that allowed them to sleep soundly. Knowing that pirates and raiders would face swift human justice, the Korthon Confederacy filed a formal protest, arguing that humanity's withdrawal violated mutual defense agreements, the Sawari. Harmony offered increasingly generous trade deals if humanity would reconsider, but Earth's government remained firm, and the elder species of the Council continued their strange passive acceptance in a dim bar on Station Kepler 442. A mixed crowd of humans and aliens gathered to share final drinks before the human contingent departed. Day Solari merchant named Kessex raised his glass in a toast. To the humans who kept the trade lanes safe, the humans drank with mixed emotions. Proud of their service but uncertain about what came next. "What do you think will happen?" a young human ensign asked Kessex. "When we're gone and the next crisis emerges." Kessex's scales rippled with the color of worry. "I hope the Council has a plan," he said quietly, "because without you humans, I don't know who will stand between us and the darkness." The ensign wanted to reassure him, but could not find the words. She had seen the Council records, had studied the threats that lurked in unexplored space. The Kryn swarm alone had tested human defenses a dozen times in the past century, always probing, always searching for weakness. With humanity gone, who would stop them? But these were not her decisions to make. She was a junior officer following orders, playing her small part in humanity's great withdrawal across the galaxy. The last human ships powered up their drives and began the journey home behind them. They left empty stations and quiet patrol routes. Younger species worried and prepared their own inadequate defenses. The elder species of the Council watched and waited with expressions that suggested they knew something humanity did. Not something vast and terrible and patient. 3 months passed in relative quiet after the last human warship crossed back into Earth-controlled space, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting for something to break. The break came at Station Meridian, a mining outpost on the edge of Council territory where the Korthon operated extensive mineral extraction facilities. The Kryn came without warning there. Ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a swarm formation that blotted out the stars. Thousands of organic vessels pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as their form of communication station. Meridian had no military defenses worth mentioning, just a handful of corporate security craft designed to deter claim jumpers and pirates. Kryn ignored the security ships entirely and simply flew through them, their acid-spitting weapons dissolving the small vessels into component molecules. Station Master Torvin broadcast the emergency signal on all frequencies. "This is Meridian Station. We are under attack by Kryn forces requesting immediate assistance. We have 15,000 civilians and no effective defense." The message reached the nearest Council response station 40 minutes later. By then, Meridian's outer habitation ring was already breached and venting atmosphere. The Council station commander, a career bureaucrat from the Pilthian Collective, followed protocol perfectly. She filed an emergency report, requested authorization to deploy observers, and scheduled a response committee meeting for the following day. No ships launched to help, no weapons were fired in Meridian's defense. The Kryn systematically tore the station apart, harvesting its population for biomass and its materials for incorporation into their swarm. 8 hours after the attack began, Meridian Station ceased to exist as anything more than debris. Maria's Fortune was a human-registered freighter operating under an independent license, carrying medical supplies from a pharmaceutical company on New Terra to a Selwary colony 2 systems away. Captain Maria Santos had been hauling cargo for 30 years, First in the Earth Defense Force, and then as a civilian contractor, she ran a tight ship with a crew of 8. All veterans who preferred the quiet life of trade runs to the regimented structure of military service when Meridian's distress call reached her ship. Santos was 6 hours away at standard cruise speed, Captain. Her communications officer called out, "I'm picking up a station under attack." Looks like Kryn Santos felt her jaw tighten. The Kryn were supposed to be contained. Pushed back to their home cluster by human fleets during the third incursion 15 years ago? Plot a course, she ordered. Maximum burn, Captain. We're not a warship, her first mate protested. We've got nothing but point defense lasers and a cargo hold full of medicine. Then we evacuate who we can, Santos replied, already running calculations in her head. We've got the cargo capacity to take on 300 people if we pack them in tight. The Maria's Fortune pushed its engines past safe limits. Racing toward a battle it had no chance of winning, they arrived to find Meridian already dying. Its structure compromised and Kryn swarm ships feeding on the remains. Santos brought her ship in close to one of the intact habitation modules and matched velocity. Her crew, working frantically to connect emergency airlock survivors, poured into the cargo holds. Mostly Korthon workers and their families. Traumatized and terrified, that's capacity, Captain, her first mate reported. We need to go now. Santos wanted to argue, wanted to save more. But the Kryn were already turning their attention to this new source of biomass. Get us out of here, she ordered. Feeling every one of the lives she was leaving behind like a physical weight, the Maria's Fortune broke away from the dying station and began spooling up its faster-than-light drive as they accelerated. Santos's sensors officer called out, "Captain, I'm reading another ship-in system, bearing 315. Distance 12 million kilometers, identify." Santos demanded its reading as Rex diplomatic vessel. Not moving, just observing, Santos felt cold anger wash through her. Observing, she repeated. They're just watching while people die. Should I hail them? Her communications officer asked. No, Santos said. Just mark the position in our logs. I want to record that they were here and did nothing. The Maria's Fortune jumped too faster than light. Its cargo holds filled with refugees, and its captain filled with questions about what the council had become. The attack on Meridian was not isolated over the following weeks. Kryn swarms hit 6 more outlying stations and settlements. Each attack followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, total destruction, and complete council inaction. Beyond sending observer ships and issuing diplomatic statements of concern, younger council species began to panic. The Korthon Confederacy mobilized its entire fleet, pulling ships from trade and exploration to form defensive perimeters around population centers. The Selwary Harmony pleaded with the elder species to intervene, to use their advanced technology to stop the attacks, but the Vrex, the Luminarchs, the Depth Dwellers, and the other ancient species maintained their passive stance. They sent observers. They filed reports, they held meetings and debates. But they deployed no weapons and took no military action in the council chambers. The Korthon delegate pounded his manipulator appendages on his platform in frustration. Why will you not act? You have the power, you have the resources. Thousands are dying while you debate. The Vrex matriarch responded with her usual graceful tentacle patterns. We are pursuing all diplomatic channels and working to understand the Kryn's motivations. Their motivation is clear, the Korthon delegate clicked. They want to consume us all. This is not a diplomatic situation. This is war. We prefer to exhaust all peaceful options before considering military response. The Luminarch Prime Pulse, the younger species, left the chamber in despair, knowing their own forces were insufficient to stop the Kryn if the swarms decided to push deeper into council space on New Terra. Former Ambassador Chen watched the news reports with growing unease. She had retired to a small apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, planning to spend her remaining years writing her memoirs and enjoying Earth's recovered ecosystems. But the reports from council space troubled her. She had spent decades studying the elder species, learning their subtle communications and cultural patterns. Their current behavior made no sense. These were civilizations that had maintained galactic peace for millennia, species with technology and resources far beyond what the younger races could muster, yet they sat idle while the Kryn ravaged the frontier. Chen began pulling data from her old contacts, retired diplomats, and cultural liaisons who still had access to council archives. She cross-referenced Kryn attack patterns with historical records. Looking for precedents, what she found disturbed her more than the attacks themselves. Major Kryn incursion in recorded history had followed the same pattern. Initial attacks on frontier territories, escalation toward core worlds, and then sudden cessation. The previous incursion had been stopped by human military intervention. The one before that, 800 years ago, had been stopped by the Morthani Dominion, a now extinct species that had served the Council in much the same capacity as humanity before that. The Vokresh also extinct. A pattern emerged from the data, a terrible pattern of species rising to serve as the Council's military arm and then vanishing from the historical. Record Chen sat back from her computer terminal and stared at the ocean without seeing it. She was missing something. Something important. The elder species were not passive by nature. They had maintained order across a galaxy for countless generations. Their current inaction was deliberate, purposeful. And that terrified her more than the Kryn ever could, because if they were choosing not to act, that meant they had a reason, and Chen suspected that reason had everything to do with humanity's recent departure. The delegation arrived at New Terra on a converted passenger liner. Representatives from 12 different council species, crowding into a ship designed for half that many. They came without formal invitation, without diplomatic protocols. Driven by desperation, as Kryn attacks claimed more lives each day, Earth's government initially refused to receive them, citing humanity's withdrawal from council affairs. But Admiral James Park, commander of Earth's 3rd Defense Fleet and a veteran of countless engagements against pirates and raiders, made a personal appeal to the president. We can't just ignore this, Park argued over a secure communication channel. These are people we served alongside for decades. People we called allies. We left the council precisely to avoid being dragged into conflicts like this, President Okafor replied, her face tight with the stress of navigating Earth's new independent stance. If we respond to every crisis, we might as well have stayed. This isn't just another border dispute, Park insisted. The Kryn are a threat to all life in that sector. And if the council can't or won't stop them, the death toll will be catastrophic. Why can't the council stop them? Okafor asked. They have resources and technology far beyond ours. Why do they need us? Park had no answer for that. But his instincts told him something was deeply wrong with the situation. After 3 days of internal debate, Earth's government agreed to receive the delegation as a humanitarian gesture. But with no promises of intervention, the meeting took place in Geneva. In the same conference center where humanity had first been welcomed into the Galactic Council 200 years earlier, the delegates looked haggard, their various physiologies showing signs of stress and exhaustion. The Korthon representative, a military commander named Thrax, spoke first through his translator. We come to beg for help that we know we have no right to request. Humanity owes us nothing, but thousands die while the council debates. Admiral Park sat in the observers section. Technically, present only to provide military context if requested, he watched the salary delegate present.
Holographic images of the attacks.
Watched the young Pilthian envoy describe families torn apart by Kryn.
Harvesting.
Operations President Okafor listened with visible discomfort. Her training as a leader warring with her compassion as a human being. We sympathize with your situation, she said carefully. But humanity made a clear choice to withdraw from council military operations. We cannot reverse that decision based on a single crisis. However tragic, the elder species have the power to stop this. Thrax clicked, his mandibles vibrating with frustration. The Vrex alone could end the Kryn threat with a fraction of their technological capability, yet they send only observers. Why? Okafor asked, leaning forward. Why won't they act? We don't know, the Salwari delegate admitted, his scales flushing with colors of confusion and fear. They speak of diplomatic solutions and measured responses. But the Kryn do not negotiate. They only consume. The meeting continued for hours, the delegates making their case while Earth's government searched for a response that balanced humanity's interests with the moral weight of watching civilizations burn in the end. Okafor could offer only emergency aid supplies and asylum for refugees, no military intervention. No combat fleets, no return to the role humanity had abandoned. The delegates left disappointed, but not surprised. And Admiral Park left angry. He spent the evening in his quarters at the Geneva military complex. Reviewing tactical data on the Kryn attacks, his aide, Commander Lisa Brennan, found him there after midnight. Surrounded by holographic displays of swarm formations and attack vectors, "You're thinking about going anyway," she said. "Not as a question. I'm thinking about what I swore to protect," Park replied. And it wasn't just Earth. It was the principle that those with the power to help have a responsibility to act. "We have our orders." Brennan reminded him, "Orders can be challenged," Park said quietly. "I spent 30 years in uniform following orders, and most of them were good orders from good people trying to do their best. But sometimes following orders means watching innocents die when you have the power to save them over the next week." Park began making quiet inquiries. Among his network of retired military officers and civilian contractors, he found a surprising number of people who shared his feelings. Veterans who had left the service after humanity's council withdrawal, but who couldn't ignore the suffering in council space. Captain Maria Santos was among the first to respond to Park's carefully worded message. Her experience at Meridian had left her with nightmares and a burning need to do something meaningful. She pledged her ship and her crew to whatever Park was planning. Others followed. Retired destroyer captains with ships mothballed and orbital yards, merchant marine officers with cargo vessels that could be retrofitted, even a few active duty personnel willing to risk court-martial. Park knew he was crossing lines that could end his career and possibly land him in prison. What he was organizing looked dangerously close to forming a private military force without government authorization, but he also knew he could live with prison more easily than he could live with doing nothing. 2 weeks after the delegation's departure, Park sent a formal request to President Okafor, permission to lead a volunteer humanitarian mission to Council Space. The request detailed his intention to gather civilian vessels and retired military personnel, to operate outside official Earth government channels, and to provide defensive support to Council worlds threatened by Kryn. At Okafor's response came within hours. And it was not what Park expected. Request denied. It read, however, "Earth government cannot prevent retired personnel from exercising their rights as civilians to travel where they choose. And we cannot prevent civilians from organizing mutual defense arrangements in areas outside our jurisdiction." It was permission wrapped in plausible deniability, and Park recognized it for the gift it was. The mobilization began immediately. The volunteer fleet assembled at Haven Station, a civilian orbital platform in the outer system. Out of sight of the official military installations, they came in all sizes and configurations: old destroyer-class vessels pulled from reserve, cargo haulers hastily fitted with surplus weapons, even a few luxury yachts whose wealthy owners wanted to contribute. Fleet numbered 43 ships when Park arrived aboard his flagship, the retired heavy cruiser Indomitable. Not enough to fight the Kryn head-in, but enough to evacuate civilians and provide escort protection for refugee convoys. Park stood on the Indomitable's bridge and looked out at the assembled vessels. Feeling a mix of pride and apprehension, these were people who had every reason to stay home, to enjoy the safety and comfort of human space. Instead, they had chosen to sail toward danger because it was the right thing to do. Fleet assembled and ready, Admiral Commander Brennan reported. Park said, and gave the order to jump to faster than light. The volunteer fleet vanished from human space, heading toward the conflict zones where the Kryn swarms were growing stronger each day. Behind them, in her Geneva office, President Okafor watched the orbital tracking data and allowed herself a small smile. She had given Park what he needed while maintaining Earth's official neutrality. Meanwhile, in her retirement apartment, former Ambassador Chen was assembling pieces of a puzzle that frightened her more with each connection. She made the pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Every time a military species rose to prominence in council service, a crisis emerged that tested them. And every time the elder species watched and waited, Chun made a decision that would change everything. She activated her old diplomatic credentials, ones that technically should no longer work, and requested a private meeting with the Vrex matriarch to her surprise. The matriarch accepted immediately as Chen boarded a shuttle to the nearest council diplomatic station. She carried with her documentation of the patterns. She had discovered a growing certainty that humanity was being tested. In ways they didn't understand, the volunteer fleet jumped toward the war zone. Chen jumped toward the truth and across the galaxy. The elder species of the council continued their mysterious observation, waiting for humanity to reveal what they truly were. The diplomatic station hung in neutral space, equidistant from a dozen major civilizations, a place where treaties were signed and wars were prevented. Ambassador Chen had not visited this station in 3 months, not since the day she had announced humanity's withdrawal from the council. Now she walked its familiar corridors toward a meeting that might explain everything or shatter what little certainty she had. Left the Vrex matriarch waited in a private chamber. Suspended in her methane atmosphere, tentacles drifting in patterns that Chen had learned to read as contemplation. Ambassador Chen. The matriarch greeted her through the translation matrix. You have questions that deserve answers. Chen sat in the human-configured section of the chamber, separated from the matriarch by a transparent barrier that maintained their different atmospheric needs. You knew I was investigating, Chen said. Not bothering with diplomatic niceties. You've been monitoring my research, we have, the matriarch confirmed. And we've been waiting to see if you would find the pattern. Chen pulled up her data tablet and displayed the historical analysis she had compiled. Every major species that has served the Council in a military capacity has eventually disappeared from the historical record. The Morthany, the Velcrash, the Cytherian Concordat, all gone, and you fear humanity will join that list. The matriarch observed. I fear I don't understand what list it is, Chen replied. Were they destroyed? Did they leave? What happened to these civilizations? The matriarch's tentacles formed a complex pattern that the translator struggled to render. The truth is more complicated than simple destruction or departure. Ambassador Chen, may I show you something? The chamber's holographic systems activated. Displaying an image of the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago, the council, you know, is not what it appears. The matriarch began, her tentacles moving in rhythm with the display. It is not a federation of equals working toward mutual prosperity. It is something much older and much more necessary. The hologram shifted, showing civilizations rising and falling across the spiral arms. Every species that achieves faster than light travel eventually reaches a critical threshold. The matriarch continued. The technology to manipulate fundamental forces, to weaponize dimensions themselves, to reshape reality according to will and desire. Chen felt her throat go dry as she watched civilizations in the hologram suddenly expand. Their influence spreading like wildfire across the stars. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished in bursts of violence that consumed entire sectors. The power to transcend physical limitations comes with a terrible danger, the matriarch explained. Most species that achieve this level of technology destroy themselves within a few generations. Unable to resist the temptation to use their power for conquest, or unable to survive the wars that result, the council members are the survivors. Chen said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. The ones who chose restraint precisely, the matriarch confirmed. Millennia ago, the eldest of us made a pact. We would lock away our most dangerous capabilities, maintain them only as a last resort, and never reveal their full extent to younger species. The hologram showed the council forming. Ancient civilizations coming together in agreement, but we needed protectors, the matriarch continued. Species young enough to lack the most dangerous technologies, but capable enough to handle the threats that still emerge. Pirates, raiders, aggressive expansionist cultures like the Kryn you used us, Chen said, feeling anger rising in her chest. You recruited humanity to be your weapon, while pretending to be our equals. We recruited humanity to be our shield, the matriarch corrected. And yes, we were not entirely honest about the nature of the relationship. But we had reason for that deception. The hologram shifted again, showing the species that had served before humanity. Each military species we have recruited has faced the same test, the matriarch said quietly. When they gain enough power and influence, when they become the dominant force in council security, we create a crisis. Chen stood up, her anger turning to horror. The Kryn attacks. You let them happen. You could have stopped them at any time. The Kryn serve a purpose, the matriarch confirmed. They are controlled, their attacks limited to acceptable losses. But they serve as a measure of a species' character. Acceptable losses? Chen repeated, her voice rising. Thousands have died, entire stations destroyed, and you call that acceptable? Every species that becomes powerful enough to threaten the galactic order must answer a fundamental question. The matriarch said, her tentacles forming patterns of regret and necessity. When you have the power to help but no obligation to do so, what choice do you make? The hologram showed humanity's withdrawal from the council. Then the Kryn attacks, beginning you left the council. Which was your right, the matriarch explained. You owed us nothing, had no treaties requiring your aid. Yet we created a situation where people suffered, where your former allies begged for help. And then we waited to see what humanity would choose. Chen felt sick as the pieces fell into place. And if we had ignored them, if we had stayed in human space and let the Kryn rampage, the matriarch's tentacles went still, a sign of absolute seriousness. Then we would have known that humanity was following the path of conquest and self-interest. That given enough time and technological advancement, you would become a threat to galactic stability, and you would have destroyed us, Chen finished. We would have unmade you, the matriarch confirmed. Completely and without trace, using weapons that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, that can target not just ships and planets, but the fundamental probability of a species' existence. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Chen sat back down, her legs suddenly weak, but humanity did respond, she said. Admiral Park is leading a volunteer fleet to the conflict zones. Right now we know, the matriarch said. And for the first time, Chen detected something like approval in the tentacle patterns. He organized a fleet without government authorization, risking his career and freedom. Motivated purely by the desire to help those in need, hundreds of humans joined him. Chen added, civilians and retired military. People who had every reason to stay home but chose to help anyway. This is why we have hope for your species. The matriarch said, you passed the test, Ambassador Chen. Humanity has proven that even with power and capability, even when released from obligation, you choose to help those who suffer. Chen felt tears forming but refused to let them fall. You murdered thousands to test us. How is that any different from the extinctional level threats you claim to prevent? It is different because we limit the damage, the matriarch replied. The Kryn are controlled, their attacks measured. The loss is tragic, but contained. If we had not tested humanity now, and you had later developed transcendent technology with conquest in your hearts, the losses would be measured in entire civilizations, the Morthani, the Velcresh, Chen said. They failed the test. They revealed themselves to be threats that would inevitably use transcendent power for domination. We could not allow them to reach that level of technology, so we removed them from the timeline itself. Erase not just their present, but their potential future. Chen looked at the ancient being before her and saw the weight of countless such decisions in the patterns of her tentacles. What happens now? Chen asked. Humanity knows the truth, or at least I know it now. You face a choice, the matriarch said. You can share this knowledge with your government, potentially causing conflict with the council. Or you can work with us to guide humanity toward a better understanding of true power and the responsibility it carries. You want us back in the council, Chen realized. But with full knowledge this time, we want to offer humanity something that has never been offered before, the matriarch corrected. Not membership as protectors, but apprenticeship toward eventual partnership. You are not ready to join us as true equals. Your civilization is still young. But you have shown the capacity for the wisdom we require, and if we refuse, then we will respect your choice and maintain our current arrangement, the matriarch said. But we believe humanity's potential is too valuable to waste. You could become something truly remarkable given time and proper guidance. Chen sat in silence, processing the enormity of what she had learned outside this chamber. Admiral Park was leading a humanitarian mission that he believed was defying. Earth's government to help suffering people in truth. He was proving humanity's worthiness to eventually wield power that could reshape reality itself. The test was over, and humanity had passed, but the real education was just beginning. The volunteer fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Outer Veil sector. Where Kryn attacks had been most concentrated, Admiral Park stood on the Indomitable's bridge, studying the tactical display that showed 3 Kryn swarm clusters converging on a mining colony designated as Settlement Kappa 7 population. He asked Commander Brennan 12,000. Mostly Korthon, with some Solwary support staff, she replied. The colony has been broadcasting distress signals for 6 hours. No council response. Park felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. His fleet was outnumbered and outgunned. Civilian vessels crewed by volunteers facing a hive organism that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. All ships. He broadcast on the fleet channel. We're not here to win a war. We're here to buy time for evacuation and show these people they haven't been abandoned. Combat vessels form a defensive perimeter. Transports prepare for emergency boarding procedures. The fleet moved into position with remarkable coordination, considering most of these ships and crews had never worked together before. Park watched the tactical display and felt a surge of pride at what ordinary people could accomplish when motivated by something beyond self-interest. Kryn swarms detected the human fleet and immediately shifted course to intercept thousands of organic ships, each pulsing with bioluminescent communication patterns. Accelerated toward the humans with predatory intent. Here they come. Brennan announced unnecessarily. The battle began at maximum weapons range. Human missiles and energy beams lancing out to meet the Kryn swarmed the organic ships. Absorb damage that would cripple conventional vessels. Their living hulls regenerating and adapting to incoming fire, but the humans had decades of experience fighting the Kryn. Knew their patterns and vulnerabilities. Park directed the fleet with precision, using concentrated fire to overwhelm individual swarm ships before they could adapt, rotating defensive formations to present fresh shields against Kryn acid weapons. It was brutal, methodical combat. And the humans were slowly losing. Settlement Kappa 7 is launching escape pods, the communications officer reported. The transports are moving in to recover. That was what mattered. Park reminded himself every minute his fleet held the Kryn's attention was another 100 people saved. The Indomitable shuddered as a Kryn bioweapon struck its forward shields. The organic matter, trying to burn through the energy barrier like acid through metal. Forward shields at 40%. The tactical officer called out rotate ship. Present starboard shields. Park ordered all batteries. Concentrated fire on cluster designation Alpha 3. The human fleet poured fire into the designated Kryn formation, destroying dozens of swarm ships in a coordinated barrage. But for every ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Park was running the calculations in his head, counting the minutes until his fleet's shields failed and the Kryn tore them apart. They had maybe 20 minutes before the defense collapsed, sir, a sensor officer said, her voice uncertain. I'm reading new contacts entering the system. Multiple ships. Massive energy signatures. Park pulled up the sensor data and felt his breath catch. For X ships, Luminarch vessels, Depth Dweller cruisers, and a dozen other Elder species craft were dropping out of faster than light all around the battlefield. Open a channel, Park ordered. This is Admiral James Park of Earth. We appreciate the reinforcements, but we've got the situation under Admiral Park. The Vrex Matriarch's translated voice interrupted. Please observe the space around the Kryn swarms began to fold in ways that Park's eyes couldn't quite process. He had studied higher dimensional physics, understood the theoretical mathematics, but seeing it happen in real time was something else entirely. Vrex ships weren't moving through space so much as redefining what space meant in their local area. Park watched on the tactical display as reality itself bent around the Kryn forces. The swarm ships simply stopped moving, frozen in place, as if time itself had decided to take a break in that specific region of space. Then they began to dissolve. Not destroyed by weapons, but unmade at the molecular level. Reduced to their component atoms through what looked like applied probability manipulation, the entire Kryn force. Thousands of ships that had been moments away from overwhelming the human fleet ceased to exist in less than 30 seconds. Display cleared to show only the elder species vessels in Park's volunteer fleet. Still in defensive formation, weapons still charged, prepared for a battle that had ended before they could comprehend what happened. "What?" Commander Brennan said quietly. "In the actual hell was that?" Park had no answer. The communications channel opened again, and the Vrex matriarch's voice carried a note of something that might have been approval. "Admiral Park, your fleet performed admirably. The evacuation of settlement Kappa 7 is complete. All civilians are safe," Matriarch Park said, finding his voice. "That technology, that power. If you've had that capability all along, why did you let the attacks continue? Why did thousands die when you could have stopped this at any time?" "That," the matriarch replied, "is a conversation best held in person. Ambassador Chen is currently at Diplomatic Station Theta. She can explain what you need to understand. We are sending coordinates for a rendezvous." The channel closed, leaving Park and his crew staring at their displays in shocked silence. What they just witnessed rewrote their understanding of the galaxy, of the Council, of everything they thought they knew about the balance of power in space. "Set course for the coordinates," Park ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "And somebody get me a comprehensive sensor log of whatever the hell that was." The volunteer fleet broke formation and began moving toward the diplomatic station. Their mission suddenly transformed from humanitarian rescue to something far more significant. Diplomatic Station Theta. Ambassador Chen waited in the main conference chamber with the Vrex matriarch and representatives from half a dozen other elder species. Admiral Park arrived, still in his combat uniform and carrying the weight of battle stress on his shoulders. Chen greeted him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Admiral," she said, "I'm glad you survived. You need to see this." She activated the holographic display and began showing Park the same information the matriarch had shared with her, the true nature of the Council. The cycle of military species rising and being tested, the terrible weapons the elders kept locked away. Park listened in silence, his expression growing darker as the full picture emerged. When Chen finished, he turned to face the Vrex matriarch directly. "You let thousands die to test whether we would help them," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You manipulated us. Used suffering as a measuring stick for our moral character." "Yes," the matriarch confirmed, making no attempt to justify or excuse. "We did, and if we had failed your test, you would have erased us from existence. We would have prevented your species from ever achieving the level of power that would make you a threat to all life in the galaxy." The matriarch said, "It is a terrible responsibility, but one we bear because the alternative is worse." Park wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the manipulation and the deaths, but he was a military officer who had made hard choices in the name of strategic necessity. I understood the logic even as he hated it. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now, we offer you the truth," the Luminarch Prime pulsed, its bioluminescent communication translated into human language. "No more deception, no more hidden purposes. Humanity has proven itself worthy of understanding what we truly are and what you might someday become." A Depth Dweller representative emerged partially from its shadow field, its sensory stalks orienting toward Park. "We offer apprenticeship, the chance to learn not just advanced technology, but the wisdom to wield it responsibly. It will take generations, perhaps millennia, but humanity could eventually join us as true partners in maintaining galactic stability. And if we refuse?" Park asked. "Then we respect your choice," the matriarch said. "We will maintain our current relationship. Humanity remains independent. We handle threats like the Kryn ourselves. No obligation on either side." Park looked at Chen, seeing his own conflict reflected in her expression. "This is too big for me to decide," he said. "Earth's government needs to know everything we agree," the matriarch said. "We are prepared to meet with your leadership and present our offer formally. But we wanted you to understand first, you and Ambassador Chen, because you have both demonstrated the qualities we hope all of humanity shares." The meeting continued for hours, the elder species answering questions about their technology, their history, their vision for humanity's potential role. Park learned that the weapons they had witnessed were just the surface of what was possible, that the elder species could manipulate time itself, could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously, could reshape reality according to mathematical principles that humanity had barely begun to theorize, but they had chosen not to, had locked those capabilities away except in the most extreme circumstances, because they understood that such power corrupted and destroyed those who wielded it. Without proper wisdom and restraint, 6 weeks later, a formal delegation from Earth arrived at the council chambers,